If I'm being honest, I had no idea what I was doing when I passed my check ride and got my pilot's license. It's interesting how you can pass a check ride and not really know how to fly proficiently. Could I land safely? Check. Could I take off safely? Check. Could I do local flights of about 150 miles safely and confidently? Check. Could I do a multi-state cross-country and handling all the weather that goes along with that safely? First, let's talk about my check ride. Beulah, the town I live in, doesn't have a flight school. And so I either had to go up, it was like an hour and a half drive to Minot or an hour down to Bismarck to do my flight training. But there was a local guy who helped me out. And so I had multiple instructors, some people from the flight school up in Minot, and then the local guy who did a lot of my training. And I was able to get my requirements all done in about 40 hours, the minimum flight requirement. But a lot of that time was actually solo flight time that I spent flying from Beulah to Minot. My instructors would sign me off remotely via ForeFlight, and they would sign me off, and I would just fly before I got my pilot's license from Beulah to Minot for lessons. I would do that a lot. So I didn't get as many hours of instruction time as a lot of people who get their pilot's license in 40 hours, because a lot of my hours were just flying cross-country back and forth from Minot to Beulah. In fact, on my way to the check ride, I thought I was going to have to cancel the check ride because I was almost an IMC. I was just below the clouds, and it was raining and kind of deteriorating weather, but thankfully it cleared up and I was able to get there. But that was on the way to the check ride. I didn't have my pilot's license yet, and here I am, a student pilot flying solo cross country in kind of sketchy weather. I get to my check ride, and we're doing the ground portion. It's going okay. Ground has never been my strong suit, and we're doing the ground portion, and he's going over the things in the ACS that we need to do for the flight portion of the check ride. And he said, we're going to do, short takeoff, short landings, this and that, and we're going to do a go-around procedure. And I knew what a go-around was, but it hit me that I didn't know what the procedure was because I'd never done a go-around. Not in my entire training. I'd never done a go-around. I knew what to do in my head, but I didn't know, what if I don't know the procedure? Maybe you have to, and I knew full forward of the power prop. We have a Cessna 182, so it has a variable prop, cowl flaps up, clean up your flaps once you get airspeed. I knew the rough procedure in my mind, but it hit me that what if there's something I'm missing? And so right when he said that, I started to go around procedure, and he said, yeah, go around procedure. And I said, well, what if I didn't know the go around procedure? Could I just check that in the book real quick? And he said, no, but I'm going to go get some coffee, and what you do in here while I get coffee, that doesn't matter to me. And so he went and got some coffee, and I flipped through my book real quick, and found go around procedure, and it was just a mental thing, but it hit. I'd never done a go around until the check ride. So lesson number 1, go through the ACS and make sure you've done everything in there before you do your check ride. I mean, it sounds obvious, but I'd never done a go around before my check ride. And so that kind of had me nervous. First go around ever was my check ride, because all my approaches were stable. All my landings were decent. Never had to do one. And my instructors never taught me to do a go around. So we get into the airplane, and everything's going good. I taxi out. I'm talking to the tower. My home airport doesn't have a tower, so tower, I wasn't used to talking to them. And so I'm holding short of the runway, and they said, clear for takeoff, left turn out approved to the route. And I said, clear to take off, runway 33, left turn out approved. And off the taxiway, I turned left onto the runway, right? I was holding short, turning left onto the runway. Well, in my mind, left turn out approved meant turn out onto the runway to the left. Like, you're allowed to go into the runway now. I had no clue what it meant. But that's what I thought in my mind. When he said left turn out approved, sure, left turn out approved, turn out into the runway. And so that's what I did. I turned left onto the runway. I'm like, all right, clear for takeoff. Take off, and my DPE said to go to the east. And so I take off, get to about 400 or 500 feet, start pulling her nice and easy around to the east, turning right. My DP is looking at me and looking like, and finally he says, what are you doing? And I said, you said to go east. I'm going east. And he said, what did Tower tell you to do? And I said, go east. And he said, any specific way to go east? And it was right then, it's like it clicked. Oh, that's what left turnout means. I had no clue. I had no clue that's what it meant. I didn't let on that I didn't know what it meant. I acted like, I just tried to play it off like I forgot or whatever. But no clue that's what it meant. And so it was so bad I could see my DPE struggling in his seat. Like, do I just end it now? But he decided, and he kind of gave me that choice. Do you want to keep going or whatever? And I said, yeah, let's keep going. And so we do all the procedures, but I had no clue that that's what left turnout means. And I was so annoyed. I thought I'd failed the check ride. And I do all the other procedures. I land, we get down, and of course he waits for the engine to be shut off and everything. And he turns over to me in his chair and he goes, you know what? I usually do the 3 strikes and you're out rule. You had a couple. One, when you didn't obey the tower. That's huge. But he said all of your other procedures were just virtually flawless. And he said you're a very safe pilot. So you didn't have the head knowledge. But when it came to landing, when it came to taking off, there was not one time where I felt remotely unsafe. If I was following you in my plane, and we were both landing, I would feel completely safe. And so he said, so because of that, I'm going to pass you. And so he passed me. And so, I passed my check ride. I had my pilot's license. I was ready to fly. And so, a couple weeks later, I call up a friend of mine. We want to go to a conference together. And I said, hey, you want to go to a conference together? We can fly down there. And it would cut, 8-hour drive and do 3-4 hours of flying, a nice little flight, and be fun. And he said, oh yeah, sure, let's go. He was a little nervous about me just getting my pilot's license. We're going on this flight. But I was confident. I thought, yeah, no problem. We can do this. And so I get there. And let me pause right here and say, I've told people before, the good pilots are the ones who survived their mistakes. The good pilots are the ones who survived their mistakes. The bad pilots are the ones who didn't survive their mistakes. They're not with us anymore. They're not flying anymore. But the good pilots are the ones who survived their mistakes, because what people don't want you to know sometimes is that every pilot makes mistakes, especially starting out. Especially if you're someone like me, your parents didn't fly, you had no mentors that flew. Once you were done with those 40 short hours that you learned, it was on your own YouTube and other things to learn and grow, and hopefully you don't die along the way. So the good pilots are the ones who survive their mistakes. And so I land in my friend's city and he jumps in, and I do the weight and balance. I want to be safe. I never want to take my life in my own hands, and I was prepared. And but how prepared can you be for something you don't know? I'd never flown across multiple states this long of a distance. I checked the weather to the best of my ability, but I was just a brand new VFR rated pilot. Well, there was a broken layer of clouds over his city, and I wanted to get to 11,500 feet because there was 40 mile an hour tailwinds. ForeFlight was saying 40 mile an hour tailwinds, let's get up there. And so I get up there, and something that was drilled into me somewhere along the way is that the highest cause of crashes are VFR pilots going into IMC conditions. So VFR pilots going into the clouds. That's where most of your crashes happen. And that was drilled into me somewhere along the way. I don't know if it was my instructors or the videos I watched, but it was drilled into me. Don't go into the clouds unless you're IFR rated. And so there's a scattered layer, and I started punching through, and I started getting closer and closer and closer to the clouds. And pretty soon I was closer than I'd ever been to the clouds. But I was going 90 miles per hour. That's my VX speed. Full everything. I gave it everything. I was just trying to get over those clouds. And I didn't know how to break through a hole in the clouds. I know you had to start soon. I just looked and tried it. And the closer we got, the more nervous I was getting. I'm like, I cannot go into these clouds. What do I do if I go into these clouds? I cannot go into these clouds. And it seemed like it took forever. It seemed like we were just barely moving at 90 miles per hour, just trying to get up there. And I was so nervous. And I finally got over those clouds. We didn't go into them. We didn't touch them. But looking back on it, how lucky was I to be able to do that? How many people, they accidentally go into the clouds and then something bad happens. They lose their, they get discombobulated. I was just a beginner pilot. And these are some of the stakes that are along the way. So I get above the clouds. We're at 11,500 feet with a nice tailwind. We're cruising along. And all of a sudden I look down and the clouds are getting thicker and thicker and thicker. Before I realize it, we're flying over airports that are completely IFR. Like completely IFR. It's beautiful above the cloud layer, 11,500 feet. It's wonderful. And we're cruising along with a 40-mile-an-hour tailwind. I'm thinking this is great. What I think about now when I fly over things like that is, what if my engine were to go out? What approaches would I be shooting? Back then, I didn't know what an approach was. I was a VFR rated pilot, brand new. I couldn't have shot an approach if my engine went out. But back then, great, just cruising 11,500 feet, having a grand old time. And all of a sudden, my friend, he's out. He's out like a light. And I'm starting to get a headache. And my headset's, I think maybe my headset's hurting my head or whatever. And I realize now that was oxygen deprivation. Because legally, I knew 12,500 feet for half an hour, 15,000 feet, everyone needs oxygen. Like, I knew all the numbers in my head. So I thought 11,500 feet, we're great. But in real world experience, if you're not used to that altitude, you can start to suffer oxygen deprivation. And you have to be more conscious about the way you breathe and inhale oxygen. I didn't even have an O2 sensor on board. These are the things that I know now. But back then, I had never been that high in my life before. 11,500 feet for a brand new pilot is pretty high. But we're cruising along, and we got clouds and clouds, but the weather was saying that it was supposed to clear up right before our destination. But looking back, what if something had gone wrong and I had to land? I would not have been able to do it. So these are the mistakes. These are the things that you don't necessarily know when you're a beginning pilot. And that's why my advice to beginning pilots is find somebody who is willing to fly with you on some of these first trips. They're willing to put in the time. They're willing to put in the effort to fly with you on some of these trips. Say, hey, I'm paying for gas, but would you just jump in with me? I want your experience. Maybe definitely get someone who's IFR rated. When you're a VFR pilot, it is extremely risky. I think every pilot should be IFR rated because you could be flying over clouds, but what if something happens? There's always that chance you might have to go into the clouds. And you need to know what to do when that does happen. It's not to say you can't fly cross country as a VFR rated pilot, but there are so many variables and little mistakes that can happen. But that trip went great. We landed, everything was great. We came back and it was an awesome trip. It was a great learning experience. And now I've flown, across several states several times, and you learn things every single time you fly in those long cross country flights. So that was the story of my check ride, how I barely passed. Stick around because I also have a crazy story about how I barely passed my instrument check ride with the same instructor only a year later. This has been The Aviator. Like and subscribe for more, and see you next time.